The glare of the screen showed me the pastel pink dress, which I paid for without knowing it, at a party where my chair was left empty. I am Margaret, 74 years old, a seamstress of empires, and a forgotten grandmother. They think my checkbook is eternal, but the ink is about to dry up for good. I was sitting on my porch, taking advantage of the afternoon light streaming through the large windows, which allows me to see without straining my eyes too much. At my age, you learn to value clarity, both in your surroundings and in people. I held my tablet in my hand, that modern device my oldest grandson set up for me a year ago, with the promise that we would be more connected this way. What a huge irony. I like swiping my finger across the cold glass, checking the local news, or looking up antique embroidery patterns. Even though my hands no longer have the firmness they once did to hold a needle with the mastery that made me famous in this city, I am not some old lady who sits around waiting for death while knitting baby booties. My name is Margaret, and for 40 years I was the owner of Margaret's Fabrics and Bridals. I dressed 3 generations of women for their weddings, their baptisms, and of course, their sweet 16s. I know the difference between genuine silk and cheap polyester just by brushing it with my fingertips. I built my business all by myself when my husband went out west to seek his fortune and never came back, leaving me with 2 little girls and a Singer sewing machine that I still keep in my sewing room. That machine and I raised Claire and Beatrice. I put them through college, I showed them the world, and above all, I gave them the security that they would never lack a roof over their heads or a hot meal. That afternoon, the algorithm on that app called Instagram decided to spit the truth right in my face. A photo popped up. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I dug into my nightstand drawer for my brass magnifying glass. It was that heavy one with the worn-out handle that I used to count the threads in imported lace. I brought the glass closer to the screen. There was no mistake. It was Valerie, my granddaughter, Claire's daughter. There was my little girl, radiant, wearing a pale pink tulle dress with rhinestones encrusted on the corset. It was decent work, I noted with my clinical eye, although the hem looked a little puckered. She was dancing the traditional waltz. Behind her was a banquet hall decorated with gold balloons and LED lights, tables dressed in their Sunday best, and waiters carrying high trays. I swiped to the next photo, my heart beginning to pump thick, hot blood. It was a mixture of pain and fury that rushed all the way up to my ears. In the next image was Claire, my daughter, toasting with a glass of champagne. She was laughing out loud with her friends. Those same women who always greet me with a pitch way too high, as if I were deaf or stupid. I looked at the date of the post. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. 14 days during which I had spoken to Claire 3 times on the phone. 14 days during which Valerie came to my house exactly once to ask me for money for some English textbooks, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before running out because she was in a hurry. I felt a dry chill in my stomach, the kind you get when you realize you have been the fool of the story. It was not an oversight. A party of that magnitude with a venue, a DJ, and a catered banquet takes months to plan. I myself had wired a hefty sum to Claire 6 months ago, under the guise of miscellaneous expenses for the girl. Now I understood that those miscellaneous expenses were the down payment for the venue where I was not wanted. I placed the tablet on the glass table carefully, even though I wanted to smash it against the tile floor. I took a deep breath, smelling the jasmine from my garden, trying to steady my trembling hands. No, Margaret, you are not going to cry. Tears ruin your eyesight and solve absolutely nothing. I picked up the landline, that cream-colored contraption that has been in my house since the 1990s, and dialed Claire's number. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" she answered with that rushed voice she always uses with me, as if my calling her always interrupted something vital. "Hi, honey, how are you?" "Fine, Mom, running around like always." "Did something happen? Are you feeling okay?" she asked, but not out of genuine concern. It was the anxiety of someone terrified of having to go deal with a medical emergency. "No, honey, I am fine. I was just looking here on my tablet." some really pretty pictures of Valerie popped up. It looks like she had a big party. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a thick, guilty silence. I could imagine Claire biting her lip, searching for the quickest and least painful lie. Oh yeah, Mom. It was a last-minute thing. You know how kids are nowadays. Last minute? I interrupted, my voice sounding much firmer than I felt. Claire, I see numbered tables, a designer dress, and a floral arch that costs what a factory worker makes in a month. You do not just throw that together at the last minute. It was 2 weeks ago. Oh, Mom, look. We did not tell you because we did not want you to worry. The hall was far away, way out in the suburbs. It was really hot and the music was extremely loud. You know how your knees ache with the humidity and the noise bothers you. You were going to get exhausted, Mom. It was better this way to protect you. You were going to get exhausted. The phrase echoed in my head. They were treating me like a delicate old piece of furniture, the kind it is better to leave in storage so it does not clutter the main living room. To protect me? I repeated, feeling indignation quickly replacing my pain. Claire, I am 74 years old. I am not an invalid. I organize fashion shows that lasted until the early hours of the morning when you were just a little girl. Those were different times, Mom. Now you get tired quickly. Besides, you would not have known anyone. It was just teenagers and her friends' parents. You would have been bored out of your mind. Listen, I will bring you a slice of cake later. I think there is some left over in the freezer. I have to hang up. I am walking into the grocery store. Bye. And she hung up on me. She left me with the words stuck in my mouth and the receiver buzzing in my ear. I sat there in the silence of my big, empty house. Claire, you would have been bored. You did not know anyone. Of course I did not know anyone because they have made it their mission to separate their lives from mine, accepting only what comes out of my bank account while entirely rejecting my presence. I stood up and walked toward my office. My knees creaked a little, sure, but they held me up firmly. I entered the room where I keep my important papers. It smells like old wood and lavender. I sat down at my desk and opened my accounting ledger. I am old school. Even though the bank has its app, I still prefer paper. I write down every single penny that comes in and goes out in my hardcover notebook. I went over the numbers with my magnifying glass. The first of the month, monthly allowance. Claire, house and utilities, $1,500. The first of the month. Valerie's allowance, private high school and extras, $800 the 15th of the month. Valerie's ballet classes, $250 the 20th of the month. Gas money for Claire, $300. I added up the amounts in my head. It was a small fortune. It was my pension money, the rent from the commercial properties I bought after years of grinding away and sewing until my fingers bled, and the savings from a lifetime of going without so that they could have everything. Claire has been a single mother for 10 years. Her ex-husband is a ghost who does not contribute a single dime. I took on that role. I paid the tuition for Valerie's private bilingual school because Claire said the public education system was not good enough. I pay the rent for that beautiful house in the gated community where they hosted the pre-party because Claire insisted they needed security. They believe this money is their divine right. They think it flows from an endless fountain and that my only purpose in this stage of life is to sign checks and stay quiet in my little corner so I do not get exhausted. I saw my reflection in the oval mirror hanging on the wall. I saw my gray hair, which I wear with pride in an elegant cut. I saw the wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, the marks of both laughter and worry. But I also saw my eyes, dark and full of life. I did not see the fragile old woman that Claire described. I saw Margaret, the woman who negotiated fabric prices with overseas importers who tried to scam her and who always came out on top. If I am too old to celebrate my granddaughter's life, I figured I must also be too old to understand the complexities of modern finances. If my presence causes exhaustion, my money should have the exact same effect. I opened the banking app on my tablet. My fingers, the ones that according to them are no longer good for anything, moved with a precision that would have terrified my daughter. I looked for the scheduled transfers section. There they were, as punctual as a Swiss watch, ready to be executed on the 1st of the month, which was in exactly 3 days. Transfer to Claire, rent and expenses. I tapped the delete option. The system asked me, "Are you sure you want to delete this recurring transfer?" Without hesitating for a single second, I pressed yes. I did the exact same thing with Valerie's allowance and with the gas money. Delete, delete, delete. The silence of the house no longer felt sad to me. Now it felt like a silence of expectation, like that brief moment right before the orchestra begins to play in a theater. They wanted me to rest. They wanted me to avoid getting fatigued by the noise and the hustle and bustle. Well then, I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to retire and get some rest. And banks, as everyone knows, also need their rest. I closed the tablet cover and it snapped shut with a sharp, definitive thud, like a judge's gavel handing down a sentence. I stood up and went to the kitchen to brew myself a very strong cup of coffee. I felt full of energy. They say money cannot buy happiness, but boy, does it buy attention. And if my love and my presence were not enough to earn an invitation, perhaps the absence of my capital would teach them the true value of an empty chair. I poured my coffee and looked at the calendar hanging on the wall. It was 3 days until the end of the month, 3 days until the phones would start ringing off the hook. But this time, maybe I would be just a little too tired to answer. I looked out the window at the quiet street. A cat was walking across the neighbor's fence with perfect balance. I smiled. The Sweet 16 party had already passed, but the real dance was just about to begin. The next morning dawned with a strange calm, as if the air inside my house had completely shifted in density. There were no calls. There were no fake good morning texts. Just the constant hum of the refrigerator and the birds singing out in the yard. I woke up early, just as I have done ever since I was 20 years old, and had to open the bridal shop before the sun even came up. My joints were a little stiff, but my mind was sharper than a freshly honed pair of scissors. While I drank my black, sugarless coffee, I turned the tablet back on. Not to look at photos. That had already caused enough damage. I turned it on to investigate. If Claire thought I was just an old bag whose only purpose was to sign checks, she had forgotten that long before I was a grandmother, I was a businesswoman who could spot a lying supplier from a mile away. I logged into my online banking, but this time I went straight to the details of the authorized user credit cards, the ones I gave them strictly for medical emergencies. 3 years ago, the transaction history was a highly detailed map of betrayal. I swiped my finger down the screen and felt my jaw clench. Macy's formal wear department, $1,200. Date 3 months ago. The Grand Arches Event Hall, down payment $2,500. Date 6 months ago. K Jewelers gift, $580. Date 3 weeks ago. Every single line item was a slap in the face. They had not just excluded me from the party. I had financed the whole thing, penny by penny, without even knowing it. They used the emergency medical card to pay for luxuries they supposedly could not afford. "Mom, we do not have enough for her tuition," Claire would tell me, crying on the phone, while she was simultaneously swiping my credit card to buy high heels. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. They had robbed me right under my nose, banking on the idea that my tired eyes and my supposed senility would stop me from ever checking my digital bank statements. I closed the app and marched straight to my bedroom. I opened the cedar wood closet, the one that smells of mothballs and old memories, and pulled out an old shoebox from the very back, hidden underneath some knitted quilts. I did not keep shoes in there. Inside was my true arsenal, a set of rusty keys and a thick file of documents covered in notary seals that I had not touched in years. My hands shook a little, not from my age, but from the sheer bottled-up rage as I pulled out the deed to the house where Claire and Valerie live. The house in the hills. I remember exactly when I bought it. It was at a foreclosure auction. a golden opportunity that I seized right after I closed a massive deal to make uniforms for a hotel chain. I put it in my name, of course, because you just never know the twists and turns life will take. When Claire got divorced, I told her, "Go live there, honey, so you do not have to pay rent and you can get back on your feet." We never signed a lease. I never charged her a single dime. It was a blood pact from mother to daughter. I smoothed the yellowing paper out on my bed. Legal owner, Margaret Fuentes. They lived on my property, they ate from my pension, and they clothed themselves using my credit card. And yet, somehow, I was going to be the one getting too tired at the party. The irony was so bitter that it left a metallic taste in my mouth. I realized that my biggest mistake was not giving them money, but rather giving them the absolute certainty that I was an endless, unconditional supply. I had raised a daughter who looked at her own mother not as a human being, but as a fully exploitable natural resource. I got dressed calmly. I did not put on my house robe or my orthopedic slippers. I pulled out my navy blue tailored suit, the power suit I used to wear for heavy meetings with my tax accountants. I applied a subtle red lipstick and fixed my hair. I looked in the mirror and I saw the Margaret from 20 years ago. The woman who never asked for permission, the one who built an entire real estate portfolio using nothing but a needle and a thimble. I grabbed my old brown leather briefcase. It is worn down at the corners, and the zipper gets stuck a little, but it is genuine leather, the kind they just do not make anymore. Inside it, I packed the property deed, the printed bank statements, and my checkbook. I stepped out onto the street, and instead of waiting around for some neighbor to take pity on me and offer me a ride, I raised my hand firmly and hailed a cab. "Downtown, young man. Take me to Attorney Parker's office," I told the driver. The cabbie looked at me in the rearview mirror, probably expecting me to make sweet little old lady small talk about the weather or my grandchildren. I kept completely silent, watching the city roll by. The buildings had grown taller, the traffic was definitely worse, but the fundamental rules of the game remained exactly the same. The one who holds the paperwork holds all the power. During the ride, I allowed myself to really think about the word exhaustion. Claire said I would get exhausted. Do you want to know what real exhaustion is? Exhaustion is sewing 300 hems in a single night just to deliver a client's order on time. Exhaustion is hauling 80-pound rolls of fabric up the stairs because the freight elevator broke down again. Exhaustion is raising 2 daughters entirely alone, while the whole world tries to tell you that a woman without a husband is worthless. What I felt right now was not physical exhaustion. It was a deep depletion of the soul. I was sick and tired of being completely invisible until they needed something. For years, I accepted the tiny little crumbs of their time. I accepted that they only visited me on my birthday or on Mother's Day, and even then, they were always checking their watches. I accepted their cheap excuses. "Oh, work is crazy, the traffic was a nightmare, the kid has too much homework." And like a fool, I just nodded and handed them Tupperware full of home-cooked meals so they would not have to cook. They severely underestimated me. They actually believed that just because I walk a little slower now and wear bifocals, my brain must have turned to mush. They thought a mother's love was both blind and incredibly stupid, but they forgot that for love to survive, it requires respect. And the respect vanished the very day they decided I was just extra baggage in the family portrait. I arrived at the old building right in the heart of downtown. The iron grill elevator screeched as it went up. It was a sound that felt both familiar and deeply comforting to me. Attorney Parker's office smelled of stale tobacco and lemon wood polish. "Mrs. Margaret," he exclaimed as soon as he saw me walk in. Parker is a man my age, with more hair growing out of his ears than on his head, but he possesses an absolutely brilliant legal mind. What a miracle. I thought you had completely forgotten about this old litigator. "I never forget the man who helped me trademark my brand, counselor," I replied, extending my hand out firmly. He shook it with real respect, not with that condescending, delicate touch my grandchildren use, as if I were made of fragile porcelain. We sat down. I politely declined the tea his secretary offered me. I went straight to the point. I am here to put my house in order, Parker. Literally and figuratively. I pulled the documents out of my briefcase and spread them across his mahogany desk. I explained the entire situation to him without my voice shaking even once. I did not tell him the emotional side of it. I did not cry over the missed Sweet 16 party. I spoke to him in pure numbers, about breach of trust, about credit cards being used fraudulently, and about a residential property being occupied without a signed lease. Parker listened to me in total silence, nodding gravely as he reviewed the paperwork through his own reading glasses. "Margaret," he said finally, taking his glasses off, "what you are showing me right here is sufficient grounds for several legal actions. But knowing you, you do not actually want to press criminal fraud charges against your own daughter, do you? I do not want to see her in jail, Parker. She is my daughter, in spite of everything. But I need her to understand exactly who owns the roof over her head. I want her to feel the cold reality of the outdoors, even if just for a little bit. I need you to draft a formal lease agreement." Parker raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "A lease? You want to charge her rent?" "I want to regularize the situation," I corrected him, crossing my hands gently in my lap. "The house is legally in my name. They live in it. Up until today, it has been a tacit agreement, a completely free loan. That is officially over. I want a formal binding contract with rent set at true market value, and I want them formally and legally served. No phone calls, no little text messages. I want a process server or a notary to knock on their front door and hand them the paperwork." The lawyer smiled slightly. It was a smile of pure complicity. At fair market value in that neighborhood, we are talking about $2,500 to $3,000 a month, Margaret. Your daughter will never be able to afford that if you cut off her cash flow. "I am very well aware of that," I replied dryly. "That is exactly the point. I want to see how they manage when their endless fountain magically transforms into their demanding landlord. I also need to formally revoke the power of attorney I granted her 5 years ago for my banking matters. Everything. I am taking back absolute and total control of all my assets." Parker took notes furiously on his yellow legal pad. "We will issue the formal demand. We will give them a mandatory 30-day notice to either sign the lease or vacate the premises. It is the law." 30 days. I repeated. It coincided almost perfectly with the end of the month. "Do it. And one more thing, counselor. I want that notice served by tomorrow morning. I do not want to give them even a second to invent another lie." I walked out of that office feeling 2 inches taller. The midday sun was beating down hard on the sidewalk, but it did not bother me at all. I felt alive. For years, I had just been the sweet little grandma, the mom, the reliable provider. Roles that existed only to serve other people. Today I was back to being Margaret Fuentes, the woman who owes absolutely nothing to anyone and who nobody makes a fool out of. I walked over to a nearby electronics store. I went inside and bought a brand new SIM card for my cell phone, a completely new phone number. If Claire wanted to talk to me after receiving that legal notice, it was not going to be as easy as dialing the usual number and screaming her excuses at me over the phone. She was going to have to come find me and look me dead in the eyes. I went back home and fixed myself a simple meal, some noodle soup and a little bit of chicken. I ate at the formal dining room table, that massive 12-seater table that used to be packed with people during Christmas, and which now only gathered dust on its empty chairs. I looked out toward the garden. My rose bushes desperately needed pruning. Tomorrow I would hire a landscaper. Tomorrow I would go to the beauty salon. Tomorrow I was going to start spending my own money on myself. Evening fell, and along with it, the absolute certainty that a massive storm was rapidly approaching. I knew that what I was doing was incredibly drastic. A mother does not usually charge her own daughter rent. Polite society would surely judge me. They would say that I am just a stingy, bitter old woman. But society did not have to watch my granddaughter dancing the waltz in a dress paid for by my sweat while I ate reheated leftovers completely alone in my kitchen. Dignity does not have a price tag, but rent on a house in the hills absolutely does, and it is a very high one. I sat down in my favorite armchair and opened a good book. The landline telephone was still plugged into the wall, but I had turned the ringer volume all the way down. Tomorrow would officially be day one of the rest of my life. Tomorrow, when the process server rang the doorbell of that beautiful house I paid for with my blood, sweat, and tears, Claire would finally understand that underestimating an older woman is the absolute gravest financial mistake anyone could ever make. I closed my eyes for a moment, vividly visualizing the scene. Not with malice, but with the deep satisfaction of someone who has just snapped the final piece of a very complicated puzzle right into place. Everything was perfectly ready. The silence right before an explosion is, curiously enough, the sweetest sound in the world. The dawn of the first of the month arrived with strict military punctuality, but this time, my morning routine tasted completely different. I did not wake up with the anxiety of checking to see if my bank deposits had cleared or if the online system was down. I woke up with the profound peace of a woman who no longer owes any moral debts to a single living soul. I cooked myself a breakfast I had not eaten in years, a massive plate of eggs, bacon, and hot buttered toast. Before, I used to deprive myself of these little treats because my cholesterol, or because I had to save up every penny for the girls' college fund. What an absolute fool I was. The only cholesterol that was actually killing me was the heavy bitterness of being used. At 9 in the morning, instead of being glued to the phone waiting for a thank you that was never going to come, I opened the door for Arthur. He is an old-school locksmith, the kind of guy who shows up in a beat-up truck with his heavy metal toolbox rattling around in the back. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret," he greeted me, taking his old baseball cap off. "Did you end up losing your key?" "No, Arthur. I want to change the deadbolt on the front door and the code for the electronic driveway gate, and I want heavy security sliders installed on the back door." "Did something happen, ma'am? Did you have burglars break in?" he asked, looking genuinely worried, his brow furrowing beneath his graying mustache. "Something like that," I replied with a tight half smile as I unlatched the wrought iron gate for him. "Let's just say I discovered there were people coming and going with way too much confidence. And at my age, a woman really starts to value her privacy." While Arthur worked, making the heavy metal grind and squeal, I sat out on the patio just watching him. The loud whine of his power drill was absolute music to my ears. Every single turn of the screw was a hard boundary being drawn, a border being permanently sealed shut. Claire had kept a set of keys to my house ever since the day she moved out. She used to waltz right in when I was not home to check if everything was okay, which generally meant raiding my refrigerator or permanently borrowing some fine dinnerware that I would never see again. That officially ended today. At exactly 10 o'clock, my brand new cell phone, the one whose number was only known to Attorney Parker and the local taxi dispatcher, remained completely silent. But the landline, that old cream-colored phone I left plugged in with the ringer turned off, began to aggressively flash. The little red light blinked on and off in a frantic, panicked rhythm. 1, 2, 3 times, then a quick pause, then right back at it. I could vividly picture the scene, Claire standing at an ATM or trying to pay the private school tuition online. The bold red error message flashing insufficient funds or transfer failed. At first, she would assume it was just a temporary glitch in the banking system. "Stupid bank," she would mutter, using that foul vocabulary I certainly never taught her. She would wait 10 minutes and then try to swipe the card again. By the third failed attempt, a cold, icy dread would start creeping right up her spine. Not fear for my well-being, of course, but sheer unadulterated terror for her own comfort. I did not answer the phone. I just let that little red light keep on dancing. When Arthur finally finished up, I paid him in crisp cash and handed him a very generous tip. "Here are your new keys, Mrs. Margaret. These are dimple keys. Maximum high security. Nobody is picking these locks, not even with a professional tension wrench." "Thank you, Arthur. You are a true artist." I held the brand new keys right in the palm of my hand. They felt heavy. They were freezing cold and shiny. They were the ultimate symbol of my newly reclaimed independence. I locked the front door, throwing the heavy deadbolt twice, and for the very first time in years, I truly felt that my house was entirely mine, an impenetrable fortress where absolutely no one could waltz in and demand I pay them a royal tribute. I got dressed to go out. I was not about to stay locked up inside waiting for the siege to begin. I put on a gorgeous sand-colored linen dress that I had tailored for myself a couple of summers ago. It was light, breezy, and incredibly elegant. I slid on my dark designer sunglasses. I called the local car service. "To the upscale shopping mall, please," I instructed the driver. "Drop me off right by the restaurant pavilion." As the town car cruised down the tree-lined avenues, I looked at my old neighborhood with an entirely new set of eyes. It was no longer the tedious route of endless obligations. The pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure pills, the grocery store to buy expensive food for my ungrateful guests, the bank to manually deposit their monthly checks. Now, it was a wide-open stage. I arrived at the fancy Italian restaurant I love so much, the one where they serve salmon carpaccio exactly the way God intended. I asked the hostess for a table for one, right by the window but far away from the drafty entrance. I ordered a crisp glass of white wine, ice cold. It was exactly noon. Day drinking at high noon? Yes, sir, I absolutely was. A toast to the exhausted grandma. While I waited for my food to arrive, I pulled out my tablet. I did not open Instagram. I opened my email inbox. Attorney Parker had blind copied me on the digital legal notice that was also currently being served in person. Subject line: Notice of termination of gratuitous bailment and formal lease proposal. Property address: 45 Oakwood Drive. The attached document was an absolute masterpiece of legal jargon. Phrases like precarious occupation, immediate restitution of the premises, and mandatory locative rent simply glowed off the screen. Parker certainly had not wasted a single second. The process server had to be pulling up to Claire's driveway at any given moment now. I took a slow sip of my wine and felt the crisp, cold liquid glide smoothly down my throat. The people sitting all around me were eating, chatting, and laughing. None of them had any idea that the elegant older woman sitting quietly at table 5 was currently executing a ruthless military operation against her very own flesh and blood. I felt incredibly powerful, but I also felt a sharp, sudden pang of sadness. It really did not have to end up this way. If they had only bothered to send me an invitation, if they had only said, "Grandma, please come toast with us." But their naked greed and their embarrassment over me proved to be much stronger than their love. Suddenly, my brand new phone violently vibrated against the table. I jumped slightly. It was an unknown caller ID. I hesitated to answer it, but my burning curiosity won out. "Hello, is this Mrs. Margaret Fuentes?" asked a young, completely unfamiliar female voice. "Yes, speaking. We are calling from the Dream Garden Floral Boutique. Your daughter, Mrs. Claire, actually listed this number as a secondary emergency contact a few months ago for a large corporate order. And since she is not answering her primary cell phone..." "Ah, yes. Tell me what is going on." "Well, it is just that Mrs. Claire has a severely past due balance for those expensive floral centerpieces from 2 weeks ago. She promised she would come by to pay the final installment in full today, but her credit card was just declined, and she is currently throwing a massive fit right here in the lobby. She told us to call you immediately so you could verbally authorize the overriding charge. The total comes out to $450. I let out a short, completely dry bark of laughter. The woman's audacity truly knew absolutely no bounds. Claire was currently standing in the middle of an upscale florist with her credit card declining left and right, and she had the unbelievable nerve to give them my name so I could pay for the dead, rotting flowers from a massive party I was never even invited to. "Miss," I said, my voice eerily calm, "listen to me very closely. I'm not authorizing a single thing. That party is ancient history, and I was certainly never in attendance. If Mrs. Claire does not have the funds to settle her bill, I highly suggest you tell her to either return those fancy crystal vases or grab a mop and start scrubbing the floors of your shop. Do not ever bother calling this number again." I hung up the phone and instantly blocked the number. My heart was beating incredibly fast, not out of fear, but from the pure electric adrenaline of battle. They had tried to use me all over again, treating me like some automatic backup plan, and they had just crashed headfirst into a solid brick wall. I finished my meal in perfect peace, savoring every last delicious bite of my tiramisu. I paid the expensive check using the exact same premium credit card that Claire was no longer able to use. Transaction approved. What incredibly beautiful words. I headed back home around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The town car dropped me off right at the curb. As I stepped out, I immediately noticed something was off. There was a vehicle illegally parked right in front of my driveway, completely blocking the gate. It was Claire's gray luxury SUV. There it was, the exact moment I had been simultaneously dreading and deeply craving. Claire was leaning aggressively against the hood of her SUV, her arms tightly crossed, her face bright red, practically glistening with nervous sweat and blinding fury. Valerie was slouched in the passenger seat, her eyes glued to her cell phone screen, acting as if the outside world did not even exist. I walked toward the front entrance with a firm, steady stride, making my low heels click loudly against the concrete sidewalk. Claire instantly straightened up the second she saw me, springing forward like a tightly coiled wire. "Mom!" she shrieked, not even bothering with a hello. "Where the hell have you been?" "I have been standing out here for 2 whole hours. I have called the house and your cell phone 1,000 times." I walked right up to the wrought iron gate and pulled out my shiny new keys. I purposely did not look her in the eyes right away. I just focused all my attention on finding the correct dimple key. "I went out for a nice lunch, Claire." "What is with all the screaming? The neighbors are going to think we are yelling in the middle of a fish market." "Out for lunch?" she repeated, looking utterly incredulous as she marched up to the gate. She tried to push it open, but it was locked solid. "Mom, what is going on with the bank?" "I went to pay for some things and the card keeps declining, and the monthly allowance transfer never hit my account. I have to pay the electric bill and the Wi-Fi today, or they are going to shut everything off." "Did you call the branch manager? I am sure their computer system is just down again, right?" I finally lifted my gaze. I stared directly at her through the heavy iron bars. I saw a 45-year-old woman who was still throwing tantrums like a spoiled teenager whose weekly allowance had just been cut off. There was absolutely no concern for my well-being in her eyes, just raw, frantic financial urgency. "The system is not down, honey," I said very softly. "Then what happened?" "Mom, open the gate. I am literally roasting out here in the heat." She rattled the heavy iron impatiently. She dug out her own set of keys and tried to aggressively jam hers into the cylinder. Metal clashed loudly against metal, but the key simply would not go in. Claire pushed, twisted, and furiously jiggled the handle. "What the hell is wrong with this lock?" "It won't go in." "Mom, open it." "I changed all the locks this morning, Claire," I said, keeping my tone of voice incredibly low and perfectly controlled. It was the exact same, even tone I used to use whenever a bride complained that her wedding dress was too tight after she had clearly gained 10 pounds. "And no, I am not going to open the gate." Claire stopped dead in her tracks. Her key slipped right out of her sweaty fingers and hit the pavement with a sharp, metallic clink. She stared at me with her eyes wide open, looking at me as if I had suddenly started speaking to her in ancient Greek. "What do you mean you changed the locks? Why would you do that? And what is going on with all my money?" "Mom, stop playing these stupid games. Valerie needs her textbooks for school and I have to..." Valerie had a truly beautiful Sweet 16 party, at least from what I saw in those lovely photos. I interrupted her sharply. The color drained out of Claire's face faster than if someone had thrown a bucket of bleach right on her. She opened her mouth and closed it again, looking exactly like a suffocating fish flopping out of the water. Valerie, who must have heard the commotion, rolled down the car window and leaned out, finally pulling her expensive wireless headphones out of her ears. "Oh, that," Claire stammered weakly, desperately scrambling to find that exact same pathetic lie she had already tried to use on me. "Mom, I already explained all of that to you. It was entirely for your own good. You were going to get way too exhausted." "Exactly." I nodded firmly, and I felt a freezing, calculated smile slowly spreading across my lips. "You were completely right, honey. I stayed up thinking a lot about what you said. You were going to get exhausted, and I finally realized that I am indeed incredibly exhausted. See? I told you so." She tried to quickly recover her lost ground, forcing a horribly nervous smile. "That is exactly why it is better for you to just rest and, well, just fix the bank issue real quick and we will get right out of your hair so you can take your afternoon nap. You have deeply misunderstood me." I took one step closer to the gate, standing practically face to face with her, separated only by the thick iron bars. "I am exhausted from fully supporting you financially. I am exhausted from being the personal ATM machine for a family that actively hides me in the closet. I am exhausted from entirely financing massive parties where my presence is not even wanted. So, in order to avoid any further fatigue, I have decided to completely cut everything off." Claire let out a high-pitched, hysterical laugh. What are you even talking about? Cut what off?" "The monthly transfers, the platinum credit cards, the automatic bill payments. Every single thing was permanently canceled yesterday." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds in the trees seemed to shut up just so they could eavesdrop on the drama. Valerie stormed out of the luxury SUV and marched over, her pretty little face twisted up into a deeply annoyed scowl. "Grandma, are you actually being serious right now? My card literally declined at Starbucks this morning. It was so humiliating." I stared right at her. My granddaughter, the sweet little girl I hand-knitted a baby blanket for, was now glaring at me as if I were nothing more than a broken household appliance. "I am very sorry, Valerie. You are going to have to learn how to brew your own coffee at home. It turns out it is a lot cheaper." Claire finally snapped out of it, instantly shifting from paralyzed shock to blinding, explosive rage in a single second. She grabbed the heavy iron bars with both hands, gripping them so tight her knuckles turned completely white. "You cannot legally do this to me. That is my money. It is for your own granddaughter's living expenses. You are being so incredibly selfish. I have legal rights. You are 45 years old and you have two perfectly healthy hands." I fired right back at her, feeling my spine straighten up even further. "And speaking of your legal rights, have you even been back to your house today? What the hell does the house have to do with anything? I have been out on the street running errands all morning long. Then I highly suggest you go straight home. There is a very special surprise waiting for you, taped right to your front door. Or maybe the security guard at the front gate has it. He seemed like a very polite gentleman." "A process server. He should have left a nice little packet of documents for you." "A process server?" Claire's voice violently trembled. She knew enough about life to know that that word never brings good news. "Yes. You see, honey, since I am so exhausted, I can no longer manage my properties for free." Attorney Parker has drafted a very fair lease agreement. If you want to keep living in the house in the hills, you will have to pay rent, $3,000 a month, plus a security deposit. You have 30 days to sign it or vacate the premises." Claire stepped back as if I had physically slapped her. She put her hands to her head. "You are crazy. It is my house. You gave it to me. I loaned it to you, and the loan ended the day you both decided I was a nuisance." "I am going to sue you," she shrieked, and I saw the neighbors peeking through the curtains of the house across the street. "Do it," I said, with a calm that surprised even me. "Claire, Parker has all the receipts, all the credit card statements that you fraudulently used for that lavish party, and for your luxuries. If you want to go to court, I would be absolutely delighted. I have all the invoices from the last 10 years. What do you have, Claire? Debt?" And then she looked at me, her mouth hanging wide open, understanding for the very first time that the faucet had been permanently shut off. "Mom, please." Her tone completely changed, trying to play the pity card. That tactic had worked for her entire life. "I do not have a steady job." "I have no way to pay that. What are we going to do?" I looked at her, and I felt a sharp pang in my heart. She was my daughter. My instinct was to open the gate, hug her, and tell her that everything would be all right, that I would fix it. But then I remembered the pink dress. I remembered the loud laughter in the photos. I remembered the sheer loneliness of my living room 2 weeks ago. If I gave in now, they would never respect me. If I gave in now, I would just be the foolish old woman until the day I died. "What are you going to do, Claire?" "You are going to do exactly what I did when your father walked out on us," I said, and my voice cracked just a little bit, almost imperceptibly. "You are going to work. You are going to sew. You are going to sell. You are going to clean. You are going to do whatever it takes. You have 1 month. Use your time wisely." I turned around and walked toward the front door of my house. Mom, do not walk away. Open the gate," Claire screamed behind my back, violently shaking the iron bars. I slipped the brand new key into the lock on the heavy wooden door. It turned smoothly, like butter. I stepped into my cool, completely silent house. I closed the door behind me and slid the heavy security deadbolt into place. The screams from outside turned into a distant, muffled hum. I leaned my back against the closed door, taking a deep breath. My hands were trembling slightly, but not out of fear, rather from a massive rush of adrenaline. I had finally done it. I had cut the umbilical cord that had slowly turned into a noose around my neck. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands gently traced the rim of the glass. I felt incredibly light. From the kitchen window, which faces the street but is hidden by a thick bougainvillea hedge, I watched Claire climb back into her luxury SUV, furiously punching the steering wheel. Valerie was crying. They started the engine and sped off, leaving nothing but a cloud of gray exhaust in their wake. They were gone. And for the very first time in a long time, I did not feel alone. I felt accompanied by myself, by the strong Margaret that I thought I had lost somewhere between doctor's prescriptions and grandmotherly knitting. I checked the clock. It was 5 in the afternoon. At this hour, the sun pours right through the large window in the sewing room, illuminating all the beautiful fabrics. I felt a sudden urge that I had not felt in years. I walked up the stairs, not dragging my feet, but with real purpose. I walked into the sewing room, pulled the dust sheet off my old Singer machine, and ran my hand across the cold metal. I pulled out a bolt of navy blue silk that I had been saving for a very special occasion. I never really knew what that occasion would be. Now I did. I was going to make myself a brand new dress, a dress fit for a woman who had just taken her entire life back. The war had officially been declared, and the enemy had just discovered that their opponent was not asleep. She was just waiting for the perfect moment to completely wake up. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was a fertile silence, the kind of quiet where new things begin to grow, and I was just starting to bloom all over again. The days immediately following my declaration of war were not loud like a thunderstorm, but rather tight, like a violin string, right on the verge of snapping. The house in the hills, that fortress of pure appearances that my daughter had built directly on top of my foundation, began to show some very real cracks. I did not even need to be there to see it happen. Gossip travels incredibly fast in small towns and old neighborhoods, and my good friend Susan, whose niece works over at the power company, told me every single detail while we drank our morning coffee right in my kitchen. "They cut off her electricity yesterday right at 3 in the afternoon, Margaret," she told me, dunking a sugar cookie into her mug. "My niece says your daughter caused a massive scene out on the street, screaming that it was a bank error and that she was going to sue the utility company. But the technician just showed her the disconnect order for non-payment and pulled the electric meter right off the wall." I smiled, not with joy, but with the cold, hard satisfaction of someone who just watched the laws of gravity work perfectly. Claire had always believed that electricity, running water, and high-speed Wi-Fi were basic human rights, just like the air we breathe, and not actual services paid for with the sweat of someone's brow. By freezing my credit cards and canceling all her automatic payments, harsh reality had finally hit her like a bucket of ice water. My landline, the absolute only channel of communication I left open, quickly turned into a complaint hotline. On the very first day, I got angry phone calls from two of my sisters-in-law. You know, the kind who never ever bother to visit me, but suddenly felt they had every right to chime in with their loud opinions. "Margaret, for the love of God, how could you do something like this to your own flesh and blood?" one of them snapped at me. "And what about the poor girl? Valerie is completely innocent in all of this, and now she doesn't even have internet to do her homework," the other one shrieked. I gave them both the exact same answer, with a dead calm that kind of scared even me. "If you two are so deeply concerned about the girl's well-being, why don't you go ahead and pay her internet bill yourselves? I am just way too old and exhausted to understand all that modern technology." Then I would hang up the phone and just go right back to my business. I was a very busy woman. I had pulled out every single roll of fabric I had kept carefully stored away for years. Fine silks, pure linens, imported Brussels lace. I was actively sorting through my old inventory, not to sell it, but to remind myself exactly who I really was. Tucked right between the thick folds of a burgundy fabric, I found an old, faded receipt from 15 years ago. It was for the very first car I ever bought for Claire. "So you can commute safely to college," I had told her. She totaled the car barely 3 months later and never once apologized to me. She just turned around and demanded I buy her another one. On the 4th day, the doorbell finally rang. It was not the mailman. I peeked through the living room window, barely moving the heavy lace curtain. It was Valerie. My granddaughter was standing right at the iron gate, but she certainly did not look like the flawless little Instagram princess anymore. She was wearing ripped jeans, trendy, I suppose, but they literally looked like dirty rags. Her hair was pulled back into a very messy bun. And the most shocking part of all, she was holding a small bakery box in her hands. I walked outside very slowly. I did not rush. I purposely let her wait out in the blazing sun for a few minutes. I let her feel the exact same heat I have felt so many times while waiting around for them to finally make a little bit of time for me. When I finally opened the solid wooden front door, keeping the iron security gate firmly locked, she smiled. It was a heavily rehearsed smile, the exact kind they always use for their selfies. "Hi, Grandma," she sang out in a sickeningly sweet voice, using a cute nickname she had completely stopped using about 5 years ago. "I brought you some of those sweet pastries you really like from the corner bakery down the street. Will you let me in? It is getting really hot out here." I stared at her, hard. The sweet pastries from that cheap bakery cost maybe $1.50 a piece. The designer dress she wore to her massive party cost what I usually spend on groceries in 3 whole months. The sheer discrepancy was completely insulting. "Hello, Valerie," I said, staying right on the threshold. What an absolute miracle. "Didn't you have your afternoon ballet class today?" "Oh no, Grandma. I decided to skip it today. I really wanted to come see you. I missed you so much." She lied right to my face without even blinking. Her eyes kept darting past me, looking deep into the interior of my house, most likely searching for the glowing lights of the Wi-Fi router or feeling for the blast of the central air conditioning. "Can you open the gate? I brought my school homework with me. I figured we could just hang out together for a little bit." "I cannot open the gate for you, honey. I am currently very busy resting. You know how quickly I get utterly exhausted." Her fake smile instantly faltered. She squeezed the small bakery box tight in her hands. "Grandma, please. It is insanely hot inside my house and we do not have any power. Mom has been completely hysterical, just crying all day long. All the food in our fridge is going to spoil. Just let me come inside so I can charge my phone and sit in the AC for a little while." And there it was, the absolute naked truth. It was never about the sweet pastries or a granddaughter's deep love. It was entirely about the air conditioning and the free electricity. "Valerie." My voice came out completely firm, echoing loudly against the stone entryway. "When you threw your huge party, you had air conditioning, you had bright lights, you had loud music, and you had plenty of catered food left over, and you both decided that I was simply not needed there. Right now, my house has lights and air conditioning because I actually pay for them. If your mother failed to pay her electric bill, then that is a problem the two of you are going to have to solve yourselves. Go sell your expensive designer shoes. Sell your premium smartphone, or better yet, go tell your mother to get off the couch and get a job." "You are an evil witch!" the teenager screamed, her pretty little face instantly twisting into an ugly mask of pure adolescent hatred. "Mom was totally right. You have gone completely insane in your old age. I hope you die all alone with your stupid money." She aggressively threw the bakery box right onto the ground. The sweet pastries rolled out across the dirty concrete sidewalk. She spun around on her heels and marched off, stomping her feet the whole way down the street. I looked down at the smashed pastries on the pavement. I felt a sharp pang of emotional pain. Of course I did. She is my granddaughter. But then I quickly remembered that the exact same mouth that had just cursed me out was the very same one smiling in all those photos, happily toasting with expensive champagne, entirely at my expense. I closed the heavy front door and deadbolted it twice. I did not bother picking up the ruined pastries. Let the pigeons eat them. At least the birds do not pretend to love me. 1 week later, the moment of absolute truth finally arrived. The ticking clock on the legal notice was still running down, but Claire had officially requested a mediation meeting through a public defender, mostly because she no longer had the cash to hire a private attorney. I accepted her request, but I set my own strict conditions. It would take place at Attorney Parker's downtown office on completely neutral ground, and I would certainly not be attending alone. I arrived 15 minutes early, looking absolutely impeccable. I was dressed in my pearl gray tailored suit and wearing the authentic pearl necklace my late husband gifted me the day Claire was born. Parker greeted me warmly with a hot espresso and a very thick file folder resting squarely on his desk. "Are you ready, Margaret?" he asked me, adjusting his glasses. "I am more ready than I have ever been, counselor. Today, all the childish games officially end." Claire arrived exactly 5 minutes late. She dragged her feet as she walked into the office. She had deep, dark bags under her eyes and was not wearing a single drop of makeup. She looked 10 years older than she actually was. Right behind her was a young man in an oversized suit carrying a cheap, fake leather briefcase. Valerie was not with them. Honestly, it was much better that way. When Claire saw me sitting right at the head of the large mahogany conference table, she stopped dead in her tracks. Perhaps she was expecting to see me hunched over, looking incredibly sad and full of regret. Instead, she saw me sitting perfectly upright, my hands neatly folded in my lap and my gaze crystal clear. "Mom," she started to say, her voice cracking heavily. "Sit down, Claire," I firmly ordered, pointing to the empty chair directly across from me. "There is no Mom today. There is no honey." Her cheap lawyer cleared his throat rather nervously. "Good afternoon. I am here representing Mrs. Claire Fuentes to formally appeal the eviction notice and the improper collection of back rent under the legal argument of upward alimony obligations and—" "Save your breath in the rehearsed speech, counselor," Parker interrupted with a voice like booming thunder as he flipped open his thick folder. "Your client is 45 years old. She is fully capable of working and has no documented disabilities whatsoever that would prevent her from financially supporting herself. Margaret's legal obligation to provide for her ended more than 2 full decades ago. What has been actively occurring here is a systematic, prolonged breach of trust." Parker slowly slid a thick document toward the center of the table. It was not the residential lease agreement. It was a comprehensive financial audit. Right here, we have the complete itemized breakdown of all expenditures made using Margaret's authorized user credit cards over the course of the last 3 years. Parker continued smoothly. Luxury vacations to tropical resorts, high-end designer clothing, expensive medical spa treatments, and of course, the incredibly lavish Sweet 16 party. The grand total comes out to roughly $85,000. Claire turned pale white. She stared down at the crisp paper in absolute terror. Mom, you gave me those cards. You told me they were to help us out." "I told you they were strictly for absolute emergencies." I finally spoke up, staring dead into her eyes. "A medical illness is an emergency, Claire. A blown-out tire on the side of the highway is an emergency. A $2,000 designer dress for a Sweet 16 party is certainly not an emergency. It is pure, unadulterated vanity." "But she is your only granddaughter," she sobbed openly, desperately playing her final card. "How can you possibly charge me for that? I am your daughter." I stood up from my leather chair. I walked slowly over to the large bay window of the office, turning my back to her for just a moment. I looked down at the heavy city traffic, watching all the regular people rushing around to earn an honest living. "You are my daughter. Yes, and for that exact reason, this is the most painful thing I have ever had to do. But it is also the most necessary. I turned you into a completely useless person, Claire. I gave you absolutely everything so easily that you genuinely thought the entire world owed you a living. And the worst part of it all is not the stolen money. The worst part is the utter disrespect." I turned back around to face her. "You told me I would get exhausted at the party, that it was for my own good. You lied. You did not invite me because you are deeply ashamed of me. You are embarrassed by the old seamstress who financed your entire lifestyle, simply because I do not match your wealthy, snobby friends from the gated community. You happily wanted my money at the party, but you did not want my wrinkled face ruining your perfect photos." Claire dropped her head, crying silently. Her cheap lawyer tried to intervene once more. "Mrs. Fuentes, we truly understand your deep moral pain here, but my client's current economic reality is incredibly precarious. If you move forward and evict her, they will literally be out on the street. We are appealing directly to your loving mother's heart." I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table right next to the damning financial audit. "My mother's heart is perfectly intact, which is exactly why I am not going to throw you out onto the street today. Here's a formal proposal." Claire looked up, a sudden desperate gleam of hope shining in her wet eyes. She actually thought she had won. She thought I was finally caving in. "Are you going to forgive the back rent?" she asked, sounding incredibly hopeful. "Absolutely not," I answered bluntly. "Read the paperwork." Claire picked up the document with heavily trembling hands. She read the very first few lines, and her face instantly twisted into a bizarre grimace of total disbelief. "What on earth is this? An employment contract?" "Exactly. You obviously cannot afford to pay $3,000 a month in rent. I fully understand that. but I currently need an assistant in my sewing shop. I have a lot of high-end embroidery orders that I want to take on again. The salary is exactly minimum wage, plus minor commissions for every single finished garment. You will continue to live at the property, yes, but you will occupy the small servants' quarters in the back, the one with the completely separate entrance. The main luxury house is going to be rented out. I already have a very interested tenant who is willing to pay $4,000 a month. The servants' quarters? Claire shrieked, jumping right out of her chair. It is a tiny little shoebox. You can barely fit a single bed in there. And what about Valerie? Valerie is going to share that tiny room with you. Or she can go out and look for a job too. She is 16 years old. She can easily work part-time bagging groceries at the local supermarket. It will do her a lot of good to learn exactly what it takes to earn enough cash to buy a single pair of shoes. This is completely humiliating, Claire screamed, violently throwing the paper back onto the table. You would honestly rather rent your beautiful house to a total stranger than let your own daughter live in it. I would much rather rent my house to someone who actually pays for it and respects it. And I am not going to spend that rental income on candy, Claire. It is going directly into a locked educational trust fund for Valerie's college tuition. Because if I keep handing my money blindly over to you, my granddaughter will not even make it to high school graduation. The silence inside the office was absolute. Claire's cheap lawyer quietly snapped his briefcase shut, finally realizing that he had absolutely no case left to defend. The written law was entirely on my side, but even more importantly, the moral high ground was on my side. You have exactly two options, Claire, I said, sitting back down in my leather chair with an imperial, icy calm. Option A, you sign the employment contract. You pack your bags and move into the servants' quarters. We rent out the main house, and you slowly start paying off your massive debts with honest, hard work, just like decent people do. Option B, you walk out that door. You leave today. And I swear to you on your late father's grave that I will mercilessly sue you for wire fraud and criminal breach of trust. I have every single receipt. I have the forged signatures on all the credit card slips. I have everything. And Attorney Parker here never loses a case. Claire looked desperately over at her lawyer. He just shook his head very slightly, signaling to her that she had absolutely no way out. She looked back at me. She searched deep in my eyes for any remaining trace of the highly permissive mother from before, the one who forgave everything with a quick kiss on the cheek. She did not find her. Instead, she found Margaret, the ruthless businesswoman, the ultimate survivor. "And what about my friends?" she whispered, her voice completely broken. "What are they going to say when they see me living like a maid in the back room of my own house?" "That is entirely your problem, honey. Perhaps you will finally discover that they were never actually your real friends. They were just friends with your heavy wallet, and since your wallet is now completely empty, you are going to have plenty of extra seats at your dinner table." Claire slowly took the expensive pen that Parker was offering her. She was crying openly now, big fat tears that stained the crisp white paper. Her hand was trembling violently. She signed the binding employment contract. She signed the legal authorization to rent out the main property. She signed her total and unconditional surrender. "You start on Monday bright and early at 8 in the morning," I told her, tucking my signed copy of the contract safely away into my designer bag. "And Claire, you better arrive on time. If you are even 1 minute late, I will dock your pay for the entire day. In my workshop, I do not accept cheap excuses. I only accept results." I walked right out of that office without ever looking back. Parker stayed behind to finalize the remaining paperwork. I rode the elevator down to the lobby, feeling as if a 200-pound weight had finally been lifted right off my shoulders. I did not feel any joy. No parent ever feels joy watching their own child completely fall apart, but I felt a very deep, profound peace. I had finally taken back the steering wheel of my own ship. As I stepped out onto the busy street, the warm afternoon sun hit my face perfectly. I breathed in the polluted city air as if it were the purest mountain breeze in the world. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a push notification from my banking app. Recurring automatic charge successfully canceled. I walked steadily toward the taxi stand. An elegant black luxury car pulled up right in front of me and stopped. The tinted window rolled down. It was Robert, the wealthy owner of the textile warehouse where I have bought all my premium sewing supplies for the last 30 years. Margaret, what an absolute pleasure to see you. Word on the street is you are fully reopening the old workshop. Is it true? That is exactly right, Robert. I'm getting back into the ring. I have a few stunning ideas for bridal gowns that literally will not let me sleep at night. Excellent news! This city desperately needs people who actually know what they are doing. By the way, do you need a ride anywhere? No, thank you, Robert. I think I am going to walk for a little bit. I really need to stretch my legs. People always say that at my age, you get exhausted quickly. But I will have you know, today I feel like I have enough energy to run a full marathon. He laughed warmly and waved goodbye. I just kept right on walking. My footsteps echoed firmly against the pavement. Claire and Valerie were about to learn the absolute hardest lesson of their entire privileged lives, but maybe, in the very end, they would actually thank me for it. Or maybe they would just hate me forever. It really did not matter to me anymore. What truly mattered was that I was no longer the invisible grandmother who silently pays the bills from the shadows. I was the boss now, and the boss never gets exhausted. The boss only gathers momentum. I stopped in front of a store window and looked at my reflection. I saw an older woman. Yes, but I did not see any fragility. I saw absolute power. The kind of raw power that only comes from years of hard-earned experience and a very fat checkbook, provided it is in the right pair of hands. I adjusted the lapels of my suit jacket, lifted my chin high, and continued on my way. The lavish party was officially over for them. But my second youth was only just beginning. Monday was going to be an incredibly interesting day. Very interesting indeed. The rhythmic humming of the heavy Singer sewing machine filled the air inside the workshop. It was a constant, deeply soothing sound that had completely replaced all the screaming and the angry complaints from 6 months ago. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the bright sun was streaming in at an angle through the high windows, beautifully illuminating the tiny particles of dust and lint floating around in the warm air. I looked up from my meticulous sewing. I was currently working on a stunning emerald green silk evening gown for the mayor's wife. I silently observed the scene unfolding right in front of me. I was not alone. Over at the large cutting table, with a yellow measuring tape hanging around her neck and her hair pulled back into a highly practical ponytail with zero hairspray, stood Claire, my daughter, the exact same woman who, just half a year ago, refused to lift a single finger unless it was to point at whatever shiny new toy she wanted someone to buy for her. Boss, Claire quickly corrected herself without even looking up at me, intensely focused on perfectly aligning the paper pattern over the expensive fabric. We just ran out of the reinforced black polyester thread. Should I open up the brand new box, or do we just wait for the supply order arriving tomorrow morning? Go ahead and open the new box, Claire. We absolutely cannot halt our entire production line over one single spool of thread. I answered her in a very firm voice, but entirely without the harsh bitterness of those first few difficult days. Claire nodded politely and walked briskly over to the supply shelf. She walked fast, wearing comfortable, flat shoes. Her expensive stiletto heels had completely vanished, right along with the long acrylic nails that used to prevent her from gripping the sewing needles with any real precision. Her hands now looked short, perfectly clean, and sported a couple of Band-Aids wrapped tightly around her index fingers. They were true medals of honor for anyone who works with heavy, difficult fabrics. Seeing her like this, actively measuring, cutting, and visibly sweating, produced a very strange sensation deep in my chest. It was not pity. At the very beginning, when they first moved into the cramped servants' quarters out back, which we had fixed up decently but was still barely 400 square feet, she used to cry every single night. She cried tears of pure rage and absolute humiliation. But deep hunger and basic necessity are incredibly harsh, yet highly effective teachers. Today, Claire was no longer crying. Today, Claire was working hard. The big house, that luxurious mansion in the hills they used to show off so much, was successfully rented out. Dr. Reynolds, a very serious, well-respected cardiologist, paid his $4,000 rent perfectly on time every single month. Not one red cent of that money ever touched Claire's hands. Everything went straight into the locked educational trust fund that Attorney Parker rigorously managed. "Here's the thread," Claire said, gently placing the spool right on my table. "By the way, Mrs. Gallagher came by earlier. She picked up her tailored suit and left a very nice cash tip." "And what exactly did you do with the tip?" I asked, testing her. "I put it right into the communal jar to pay for the coffee and the cookies for the shop," she replied. And for the very first time in years, I saw a bright flash of genuine, hard-earned pride shining in her eyes. "I didn't keep it for myself." I smiled slightly and went right back to my sewing. The transformation had certainly not been magical. There was a lot of screaming. There were days when she angrily threatened to just pack up and leave, even though she had absolutely nowhere else to go. There were freezing, icy silences at the dinner table. But little by little, the steady grounding routine of honest labor began to clear all the thick cobwebs right out of her head. She finally realized that her high society friends, the ones who cruelly mocked her the second they found out she was now just a lowly seamstress's assistant, were absolutely worthless. She found herself completely alone. And in that deep loneliness, she managed to reconnect with me. The heavy door of the workshop suddenly creaked open, and Valerie walked in. My granddaughter was wearing the basic uniform of the local public high school. At first, it was a massive scandal. She swore she was going to get kidnapped, that she was going to look like total trash, that she would literally die of embarrassment. 6 months later, there she was, perfectly alive and kicking. "Hi, Grandma. Hi, Mom." She greeted us, casually tossing her heavy backpack onto a chair in the corner. "Hi, honey. How did your big math test go today?" Claire asked, without ever stopping her scissors from cutting the fabric. "Pretty good, I think. I got an 85 on the last midterm, so I am doing fine." "Hey, Grandma, can I grab some of the scrap pieces of that blue fabric over there? My art teacher told us we have to make a textile collage for a project." "Of course, sweetie. They are right there in the scrap basket. But first, you already know the rule." Valerie sighed heavily, but she did not complain. She walked right over to the broom, grabbed it, and started sweeping up all the loose threads and fabric clippings that had fallen onto the floor throughout the busy workday. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She no longer had her cell phone permanently glued to her hand like some weird extension of her body. In fact, she actually had to sell her brand new top-of-the-line smartphone just to buy a much cheaper model and pay for her own monthly data plan, mostly because I firmly refused to finance her digital addiction. Now, Valerie truly understood the value of things. She knew that a single month of cell phone data cost the exact equivalent of sewing 5 complex dress hems. And funnily enough, that harsh reality had made her much sharper, much more present. "Hey, Grandma," Valerie said while she kept sweeping. "You know what? Today I saw one of my old friends from the fancy private school on Instagram. She posted a picture from her big party. The whole thing looked so incredibly fake." "Oh, really?" I commented casually, not giving it too much importance. "Yeah, everyone was just posing for the camera. Nobody was actually smiling for real. It made me think about my own sweet 16 party." She stopped sweeping for a second, leaning heavily against the broom handle. And I just felt really embarrassed. "Embarrassed about what?" Claire asked, suddenly tensing up. "Embarrassed because we spent an absolute fortune of money that was not even ours, just to impress a bunch of snobby people who don't even speak to me anymore now that I don't have a personal driver. And embarrassed because, well, because Grandma was not there." The entire workshop fell dead silent. The only sound left was the low hum of my sewing machine motor. Claire slowly set her heavy scissors down on the table. I stopped my needle mid-stitch. Valerie just kept right on sweeping, acting as if she had not just said something incredibly monumental, but the tips of her ears were glowing bright red. "It is entirely in the past now, Valerie," I said very softly. "The only thing that matters is that we are all right here together now, and nobody is getting too exhausted anymore, right?" "No, Grandma," she answered with a small, nervous giggle. "Actually, sweeping floors is a lot less exhausting than constantly pretending you are a millionaire." We closed the shop right at 6 o'clock that evening. In the past, Claire and Valerie would have immediately run off to lock themselves in their rooms or rot their brains watching television. But today was Friday. And on Fridays, using the money they had earned with their own two hands. Because I paid them their wages religiously, not a single penny more, and not a single penny less. They bought dinner for all of us. "I brought a hot rotisserie chicken and some roasted potatoes," Claire announced, setting the table in the small kitchen we occasionally shared. They had their own tiny kitchenette in the back room, but lately they vastly preferred eating dinner with me inside the main house. I allowed it, not as a basic right, but as a heavily earned privilege. We sat down at the table. I poured us some fresh lemonade. "Mom," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence as she served herself a chicken leg, "Dr. Reynolds told me this morning when I went out to grab the mail that the front garden looks absolutely gorgeous. He actually congratulated me." "You have been taking care of the landscaping?" I asked, genuinely surprised. That was certainly not written in her employment contract. "Yeah, well, mostly just on the weekends. I realized that if I do not water them, the rose bushes are going to die. And they are your precious roses. You planted those bushes over 20 years ago. It broke my heart to watch them dry up." I felt a tight knot form in my throat. It was never really about the roses. It was about her. Claire was watering something much more important than just plants. She was actively watering her own dignity, her sense of true belonging. She was taking care of something that offered her absolutely no immediate financial benefit, purely for the quiet joy of watching it bloom. That is exactly what a responsible adult does. "Thank you, honey. It makes me very happy that you are doing that. A garden truly needs a firm hand." We finished eating our dinner, and Valerie surprisingly offered to wash all the dirty dishes. I stayed at the table chatting with Claire. She looked genuinely tired, with real dark bags under her eyes. Not from partying until dawn, but from honest, hard work. "Does your back hurt?" I asked her. "Just a little bit. Standing up cutting heavy fabric all day long is pretty tough. I honestly do not know how you managed to do it all by yourself for 40 years, Mom." "I did it because I had two little girls who desperately needed to eat and get a good education," I answered, taking a slow sip of my hot tea. "Love has a funny way of making your back hurt a whole lot less." Claire lowered her gaze, looking deeply ashamed. "Please forgive me, Mom." It was certainly not the first time she had said those words over the last few months, but this time it sounded entirely different. It did not sound like a desperate plea for me to hand her the platinum credit cards back. It sounded like a profound, heartbreaking comprehension of reality. "You are already forgiven, Claire. You earned your forgiveness the exact day you grabbed the broom without me ever having to ask you to do it. But forgiveness does not magically erase the past. It just helps build the future. And I really like the future that you are building right now." She smiled, a very shy, incredibly grateful smile. "You know, the other day I bumped into Pamela, the mother of Valerie's old best friend. She asked me, using that super fake, hypocritical voice of hers, if we were struggling and needed some help. She even offered to organize a charity fundraiser for us over at the country club." "And what exactly did you say to her?" I asked, feeling my curiosity heavily piqued. I told her no, thank you very much. I told her that my mother is a highly successful entrepreneur and that I am her new managing partner. I told her we are aggressively expanding the family business and that we have never been doing better financially. I let out a massive, booming laugh, the kind of laugh that makes your stomach ache. Managing partner. Wow, what a fancy title you just invented for yourself. Well, it sounds a whole lot better than fabric cutter, right? She laughed right along with me. Besides, it is actually true. Without me, you never would have finished that massive order of private school uniforms on time. You are absolutely right. You are very good at it, Claire. You inherited my sharp eye for small details. If you keep this up, maybe someday when I actually retire for real, the shop will have your name painted on the sign. Claire stared at me, completely stunned. Are you serious? Only if you truly earn it. Everything in this life has to be earned, honey. Absolutely nothing is free. Not love, not respect, and certainly not a business. That night, right before going to bed, I stepped out onto the back patio. The night air was crisp and cool. I looked out toward the very back of the garden, where the warm light was still on inside the servants' quarters. I could clearly see the silhouettes of Claire and Valerie moving around inside. It was certainly no palace. It was not the lavish life of pure luxury they desperately wanted, but it was a real, honest life. I sat down in my old rocking chair and closed my eyes. I thought about the exact phrase that had triggered everything. You were going to get exhausted. How incredibly wrong they both were. They actually believed that old age is a direct synonym for weakness, for fragility. They honestly thought that an older woman is just an antique piece of furniture that you can easily shove into a corner. They had no idea that women like me are made out of a material that simply does not break. It only gets tougher. We are exactly like old leather. We might have deep wrinkles and battle scars, but we hold up 1,000,000 times better than any flashy, brand new synthetic fabric ever could. My ultimate revenge was not throwing them out onto the street. That would have been way too easy, and honestly, just cruel. My true revenge, my absolute masterpiece, was teaching them how to be real women. I took away their easy money just to give them something infinitely more valuable, the absolute power to fend for themselves. Tomorrow was Saturday, and the accountant was coming over. The numbers for the shop were solidly in the green. Between the rental income from the big house and the hefty profits from our new orders, I had already fully recovered everything they stole from me for that party, and then some. But the real treasure was not sitting in a bank account. The real treasure was watching Valerie sewing a loose button back onto her own school shirt yesterday afternoon. She was so incredibly focused, sticking her tongue out just a tiny bit, exactly the way I used to do when I was her age. The real treasure was watching Claire flatly reject a lunch invitation from her empty, shallow friends just so she could stay late and finish an urgent tailoring job. My cell phone suddenly vibrated on the small side table. It was an Instagram notification. I had not logged onto that app in months, but my curiosity finally got the best of me. Valerie had just posted a brand new picture. It was not a pouting selfie taken in the mirror of some luxury bathroom. It was a close-up photo of her hands, slightly stained with blue tailor's chalk, proudly holding up a scrap of embroidered fabric. The caption read, "Learning from the absolute best. My grandmother is a total legend, real family, hard work." I felt a single tear roll down my cheek. It was hot and completely solitary. I tapped the little heart icon. I liked the picture. I stood up from my rocking chair. My knees creaked loudly. Yes, my back was aching quite a bit, that too. I am 74 years old. I am certainly not made of rubber. But as I walked slowly toward my bedroom, I felt lighter than I ever have before. I did not get exhausted. I did not retire. I did not hide away. I simply changed the sewing pattern of our entire lives, mostly because the old one just did not fit us anymore. I completely ripped out the rotten seams of financial dependency, and I carefully basted everything back together using the heavy, unbreakable thread of mutual respect and hard work. Tomorrow I have to wake up very early. I have a brilliant new idea for a beautiful wedding dress using antique lace, and I know exactly who is going to help me cut the fabric. I turned off the patio light, letting the bright moon illuminate my beautiful garden, my blooming rose bushes, and the tiny back room where my 2 women were currently sleeping. Finally, the peaceful sleep of the righteous. Grandma Margaret never gets exhausted. Grandma Margaret is only just beginning to truly enjoy the absolute best stage of her entire life, the era of the absolute, highly respected matriarchy. And if anyone out there ever dares to think that I am getting way too old for anything, well, I have plenty of heavy deadbolts and a whole lot of harsh life lessons tucked safely away in my sewing box. Sweet dreams to everyone else, because tomorrow morning I am going to keep right on sewing.